All right. Hey there, and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about mental compulsions. And in this episode, we're specifically going to talk about rumination. And so the idea of rumination is really, most people don't understand it as a behavior, right? When you talk about things like OCD or anxiety, we think that because we're thinking about something all the time, like that's what the problem is, right? My mind won't stop thinking about this. But what we need to realize is rumination is actually a behavior that we engage in, right? It's actually one of the behaviors that fuels that cycle that I talk about, right? And the thing is the behavior just happens in your head. So it's hard sometimes to distinguish that, especially when you're really stuck in something. So, when we talk about the word rumination, I just want to first understand what it is, right? It's really this idea of kind of mulling on and chewing on a thought metaphorically, right? Where you're just thinking about it and thinking about it, right? It's just can't let it go, right? And the word ruminate, at least my understanding, comes from, cows and how they eat, right? And so what cows have multiple stomachs, and so what will happen is they'll swallow like grass, right? And then what they'll do is they'll throw it back up and chew on it, right? And then swallow it again. And that word ruminate comes from that, right? And so to ruminate, I mean, essentially metaphorically, you're chewing on a thought, right? And you kind of think of it like that. And so, but the real thing that I want to get out of this episode or want you to take away is the idea that rumination, right, is a behavior. Right? It's something that we do, and it's something that we can cease doing, right? And it's something within our control. That is probably one of the hardest things to get people to understand when you're really caught in something and you're really caught like worrying and analyzing and just going over something again and again. We think that going over it is actually what's going to help us, right? I need to come up with a solution. I need to figure this out. I need to figure this out. And the harder and harder we try, because oftentimes with anxiety, right, we're trying to solve something that we don't know, right? And that we can't know, right? It's trying to solve an impossible question. And because of that, though, we just keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. And what happens as a result is actually all that rumination fuels the worry and fuels the anxiety and actually fuels the power of that thought in our minds, which then makes it more alarming. And then we try to ruminate more, and that's that vicious loop that we get in. So the first thing when it comes to rumination is just understanding what it is, right? It's that chewing on a thought, right? And then the second step when it comes to like how do we stop ruminating, right? How do we get ourselves out of that loop, right? And the first thing to that is to really notice that you're ruminating, right? So a good exercise, I think, to start with, that I often offer people, right, is really this idea of like, okay, when you find yourself ruminating, right, if you find yourself like really getting lost in something, just note that you're ruminating about it, or note that you're thinking about it, right? As opposed to going full-fledged and like, how do I stop ruminating? It's like, first things first, like let's get present to when we are ruminating. And if we can consistently do that, what we can do is just start reeling ourselves back in, right? And once you notice that you're ruminating, then the next thing becomes, okay, well, what do I do instead? And that's really starting to ground yourself in the present moment, right? Starting to ground yourself in what's happening around us, right? Like right now, and then, obviously there's a lot of talk of mindfulness as being very effective for anxiety, right? One of the reasons is because it brings us back to here, right? So oftentimes grounding exercises, right? Just deep breathing, right? Just noticing your breath, because these are things that are happening right now. So what we're trying to do is get ourselves out of this rumination loop in our head and into right now. And that's and drawing ourselves back to the present, using the present moment senses, right? Like, what do I taste? What do I feel? What do I hear? What do I see? What do I smell, right? Grounding ourselves, right? And then kind of starting to move into the present and then stay in the present, right? And then as soon as our mind tries to go back, it's like, oh, ruminating and come back. And so just that practice of coming back and trying to reel yourself back in, so helpful when it comes to ruminating and really stopping that. And I wanted to bring this up because, we're on this series of more intrusive thoughts and pure OCD stuff. But again, this applies to any and all forms of anxiety. But really, I wanted to bring this up because that rumination is such a a simple behavior that we engage in without really realizing it. And so once we can become, again, understanding what rumination is, becoming more aware of it, and then just starting to reel ourselves back. And so those are the kind of big takeaways that I wanted to share in this episode today. And, if you like this and found it helpful, we'd appreciate if you'd like this and subscribe, as well as leave us a comment and even share it with, on your social feeds, just to really help get this information out to people that are struggling. And so also we have some additional resources right down in the notes that will take you over to our site, Restored Minds. And you can, check out some of our additional trainings, as well as some of our free downloads and other things that will help you on this journey. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you found it helpful, chances are someone else will too, and we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing, and also sharing this video on your social platforms. Also, if you're looking for additional help, we have some resources right down in the links below to help you on your journey. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you soon.